Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm doing my October wrap-up. So if you saw my September wrap-up, you may know that I had a really tough month in the month of September, both reading-wise and just kind of like life-wise. I have a very frank discussion about my mental health and the trouble that I was having and getting on medication and all of that in that video, so I'll link it down below if you're curious about my very exciting life. But I only read 5 books in the month of September, which for me is not very good. Although those books were quite long, I read a lot of longer books, I really struggled in September. So I was determined to have a better reading month in October, and I did. I read 12 books in the month of October, and I'm so pleased about that. I feel like I'm finally getting like my reading mojo back, and I think one of the things that helped so much with that is the fact that I really did switch genres. I am a sci-fi and fantasy reader. If you are new here, I primarily read sci-fi, I read fantasy, adult and young adult, doesn't matter. Those are definitely my things. I like most other genres too, but those are really like my true loves of reading. But in October, I read a lot of crime books, and I think that helped a lot with my reading because I felt like I was reading something new and exciting and all of that good stuff. So I'm gonna dive in because we have a lot of books to talk about. But before I do start, I want to say that audiobooks saved me this month. I listened to a boatload of audiobooks, like 6 audiobooks, and I usually don't binge audiobooks like that, but yeah, something happened and something switched in my brain where I was just like, give me more audiobooks. So I don't necessarily have copies of all of the books that I read because some of them were on audio, so I will go ahead and try to remember to put the cover on the screen if I remember. We'll see how this goes. So first things first, I did read Angel Mage by Garth Nix this month. This is his newest book, and I did a full review of it. I think I ended up settling on 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is a funny one because as I found out through kind of the comments on that review video, which I'll link down below, this book is being marketed as adult in the UK and YA everywhere else. And this is not an adult book. This is YA, but it's like, it feels like young YA. So I don't know what the hell they're thinking marketing this as an adult book. The UK does this sometimes where maybe it's because YA doesn't sell as well in the UK, and so they want to put things in as adults. So for example, the Witchland series by Susan Dennard is adult in the UK. Makes no sense. So I'm a little bit baffled by that because that really, I think, hindered my enjoyment of this book, expecting an adult book and going into it with all the marketing saying Garth Nix's first full-length, standalone novel for adults. Didn't really help matters at all. But it is a really fun book. It has angelic magic. It's kind of Three Musketeers inspired. We get the point of view of the villain. It's really good fun. So if you're looking for a fantasy romp, this is definitely one to pick up. I'll link that video down below so you can learn a little bit more, but I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next fantasy book that I read is a sequel to another book that I read earlier this year and really enjoyed. This author is killing it, and I really love his books. So this is Blood of Assassins by R.J. Barker. This is the second book in the Wounded Kingdom series, the first being Age of Assassins, which I read over the summer. I can't remember when, but I listened to these on audio, and they're really fun. They're really good fun. I don't think that this one was as strong as the first one. I gave the first one 4.5 out of 5 stars. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars, but it is still really good fun. I really enjoyed this book. I'm not really gonna say what the book is about. I was about to, and I realized that it's really spoilery, but basically he is trying to find someone who is trying to assassinate someone else. Very similar to the first one, I think, in that sense, but it's a very different book. It's a very different Girton. Our poor, lovely Girton is very jaded by this point, and I really enjoyed this one. So I am very excited to read the next one, which is King of Assassins. I have that on audiobook queued up and waiting for me, and we'll see how it goes. But I did enjoy this one. I don't think it was as strong as the first, but it's still a solid 4-star read for me. These next two books are really unusual for me because they are rereads. I almost never reread anything. I would so much rather spend that time discovering something new, or you know, finding a new favorite author, or just reading a completely new story rather than reading something I am already familiar with and I already know. So rereading books is really unusual for me, and the fact that I reread 2 books this month is even more unusual. I have pretty valid reasons for rereading these. So the very first one is Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. She is a sci-fi author, and I think that her first kind of books that sort of became really, really popular are these novellas. And I read the first one back in 2017, I believe, and I remembered almost nothing from it. I remembered really, really loving it, really enjoying it, but it had been a while since I read it, and I believe at that time either only the second one was out or none of the rest of the books were out, so I didn't get to read the rest of them. And I saw this edition at Forbidden Planet earlier this month, and I really wanted to pick it up, and I really wanted to finish this series, but in order to do that, I really had to reread the first one, and I loved it. I think I enjoyed it more the second time around, which will be a theme with these 2 books, and I thought it was just fantastic. If you've not read these novellas, they're really wonderful. Binti is a young woman who is the very first of her people to be accepted to university, this amazing university among the stars. And so she sort of abandons her family and her culture because no one has ever gone, because no one wants to go. Her people are very misunderstood, and people are very cruel and unkind toward them. But she ends up going. She is an incredible mathematician, and she is a master harmonizer, which is all explained in the book. I couldn't even begin to try to explain it. And she sets off to university, and a terrible thing happens on the way there. And her world building is beautiful. Really, really astonishing world building. I love her characters. I love the cultures that she creates. I love everything about this world. I love Binti as a character. She's an amazing, really strong, incredibly sharp and smart character. She's exactly what I love from protagonists, and it's wonderful. So I am going to be reading through the rest of the novellas. There are the other 2 in the trilogy, and then there's a kind of bonus story in this edition. I'm really looking forward to it. I had such an amazing time rereading this. So I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. You'll see this edition pop up again in future wrap-ups because I'm going to be reading them from this. The second book that I reread this month was Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is also known as The Golden Compass in the US. I don't know why they changed the title. But I didn't read this as a kid. I actually only read Northern Lights for the first time back in 2017. And I remember not being sold on it for the first half. And then when she like gets to the north and to the Arctic and everything, shit gets real. It was really, really good. So I think I gave it 4 stars when I first read it. I actually listened to the audiobook for this. There was a massive Audible sale this month, and I very much fell victim to it, and I got all 3 of His Dark Materials audiobooks. And they're full cast audiobooks, which I hated at first, but I'm finally used to it. It's okay now. And I reread Northern Lights. And I think it's one of those books that is really worth listening to, as well as reading, because it's a wonderful book to read too. But Philip Pullman narrates it and does a wonderful job, and it does have this full cast. And I feel like the adventure and Lyra's voice really comes through well on audio. So that's a big recommendation for me if you are interested in reading these books. The BBC adaptation of His Dark Materials premieres tonight at 8 o'clock. I'm trying to get all these videos done in time to watch that. I'm really, really excited, and I have started listening to the second one as well. So I loved it. I really did. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars the second time around, and I think it's a really special book. It's dark. It's it's really sinister, and I didn't quite catch on how sinister it was and how awful it was the first time I read it. So if you like dark children's books and you've not read His Dark Materials, definitely do, because they are so good. The next book that I read is a really interesting one. I spotted it at the library and I kind of pulled it off the shelf on a whim, and I'm really glad I did. I don't think this is something I would have bought for myself, but it was such a really interesting format that I'm really glad I picked it up. So this is Thornhill. This is by Pam Smye. This is a really interesting book because not only is it told in like diary entries, but also in images. Really, it's a really, God, I don't fit into this frame. It's a really beautiful book, and I really liked the way that it was divided between text and illustrations. So this book follows 2 storylines, the first one being a girl in the 1980s, in 1982, and she is living at this place called Thornhill. It's an orphanage, and she is being bullied by one of the girls who also lives there. She has this kind of like gang of other girls, and they are just absolutely horrible, and it's kind of her inner thoughts and how she's sort of dealing with this. And the other storyline takes place in 2017, which you see from the calendar on the wall. There are no actual words written in the 2017 portion, of a girl who lives nearby the abandoned Thornhill orphanage. And this book is really spooky. I wouldn't say it's scary. It's definitely creepy and it's eerie, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's the perfect kind of fall book. It's a shame that October is over already because it's a great Halloween read. I really, really enjoyed this. You'll fly through it. It's long. It's like a 500-page book, but it is something that goes by really quickly. If anyone knows any other books that are like this, that are kind of told in that half and half, let me know, because I really, really enjoyed this reading experience. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I have on my list is one that I've had on my shelf for a really long time, and I only just decided to pick up, and I'm really glad I did. It is a classic sci-fi novel, one that I've been wanting to read for a long time, and I finally made the time to do it. I'm really glad I did. This is Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. So this is the kind of classic 1950s book in which everyone on the planet, or the majority of people on the planet, witness this kind of amazing cosmic event, which most people believe is a comet, and the next day everyone who saw this happen goes blind. They lose their sight. So there's a very, very small population of sighted people left in the world, and our main character is one of them. He was laid up in the hospital with an eye injury as this thing was happening. He wakes up the next day, the hospital is mostly abandoned, he has no idea what's going on, and he has to wander through London trying to figure out what has happened, and it's clear that something terrible happened while he was in the hospital. So if that bit sounds familiar, that is because this book was a direct inspiration for the beginning of 28 Days Later, when he has, been in the hospital, he's missed the big world-changing event and has to wander through kind of abandoned London. That is directly lifted from this book, and Danny Boyle has talked about how that was a big inspiration for him. So that was really awesome. I actually happened to have watched 28 Days Later for the first time the day before I picked up this book, not knowing about that connection, so that was very good timing. The other really fun thing about this book is the Triffids, of course. So we have these kind of they're these massive, like 7 to 10 foot tall carnivorous walking plants that had become kind of a thing. They were engineered, blah, blah, blah. They become this thing in the world. No one's really bothered by these giant walking plants. They cultivate them, they harvest them, turn them into, goods, like any other crop. And when everyone goes blind, they begin to slowly take the world back, and it's really fun. So this book is really great in terms of the way that it kind of talks about nature reclaiming the world back from humanity. That's a theme that I really enjoy in books for some reason, and I thought that it was done really, really well in this. I really liked our main character, and I really liked Josella, who is kind of this woman that he meets and is his main kind of companion throughout the book. And I was really surprised, especially having just watched 28 Days Later, about the attitude of how women are handled as part of the apocalypse. It's not great. It's from the 1950s, but it didn't have a lot of the kind of creepiness that you get with sort of dealing with women and the fact that you need women to repopulate the planet and all of that. I really don't like that much in post-apocalyptic books. It icks me out, as it should. But I thought that the way that kind of women and the role of men and women and how people were going to try to rebuild was handled really well, especially with the way that different people had different ideas of how this should be done. I thought that it was really good fun. If you excuse some of the 1950s sexism, which there's one particular part that's really, really rough. A character who's not our main character goes off on this tirade about, you know, how women are lazy and depend on men and are parasites and all of this. If you ignore that, it's great. I really enjoyed this book. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I picked this up because the BookTube Goddess, who is a sort of new channel that I have discovered recently, was talking about the Midwich Cuckoos, which I got from the library on her recommendation, and I really wanted to read that. I had to wait, and I realized I had one of his books on my shelf, so I'm very thankful that I watched her video and went ahead and discovered this because I really enjoyed it. I want to read more kind of classic sci-fi like this. If you have any recommendations, everyone out there, definitely let me know. Hello, it's Editing Justine here. I have been sitting staring at this video trying to figure out why I know I read 13 books, but I've only got 12 here. And that's because I actually forgot one, which I've since lent to my dad because he's really interested in reading it. So I also read the 5, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. This was another audiobook read for me. I did a full review, so I'll link that down below, but I really enjoyed this one. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. My favorite book of the month. I don't know why I forgot it. Back to the video. So now we have all of my crime books that I read this month. So there are a lot of them. I don't know what happened. My brain just like clicked over into crime mode and I don't know, I just started devouring these books. I needed these books. So I was really happy about that. I read a lot of stuff off of my TBR. I discovered some great new things and I got to revisit one of my favorite authors. So the very first books that I want to talk about, I read Truly Devious and The Vanishing Stare this month. I listened to these both on audiobook. Truly Devious was kind of the one that kickstarted this whole crime and audiobook thing for me this month. And I had tried to read this at one point, the physical copy, which I have here obviously, and I couldn't get past the first maybe 20 pages because I thought Stevie was such a pain in the ass. Maybe I was just not in the right mood or something, but I really didn't like her. She just completely rubbed me the wrong way. But listening to the audiobook, I think, fixed a lot of those problems for me. I still don't really like Stevie as a character, but I like so much more about this book that I could kind of get past that. So, Truly Devious and The Vanishing Stare are part of a crime trilogy. The last one comes out, I think, in January or February next year. And they follow 2 crimes that happen, but the first one, the kind of overarching one, is this case of kidnapping and murder at Ellingham Academy in the 1930s. And Mr. Ellingham was the very wealthy man who built the school, and his wife and daughter were kidnapped. His wife turned up dead and his daughter was never found. And it was this horrible thing. It's this really, really famous case. And we kind of zip forward to modern times and we have this character named Stevie who has been invited to attend Ellingham Academy in the modern day, which is still running, and she is a true crime junkie. She loves true crime, she wants to study criminal justice, and she is going to solve the case at Ellingham Academy. And then another crime kind of happens in the modern day. So I had a lot of thoughts about this one. I loved a lot of it. I loved the historic sort of mystery. I loved everything that had to do with the past in the Ellingham Academy crime. I loved a lot of the side characters, like Janelle. Her friend is like my favorite character ever. She's wonderful. She's so sweet. She reminds me of someone that I would know in real life. And there was a lot to love about this. The pacing is really good. I thought that the writing is really fun. It's something you'll absolutely speed through. The audiobook is like 10 hours long and my flat was so clean in that time. I listened to it in like a day, which is absolute madness. But I didn't love Stevie. I didn't love a lot of the stuff that was happening with kind of the modern thing that happens. And I found the romance really lackluster. And I'm hoping that it kind of evens out a little bit. It did a little in The Vanishing Stair. I do think that some of the problems that I had with the first book were resolved, and it pushes forward with that historic crime much more, with Stevie learning more and more about what happened and uncovering new things. So I ended up really enjoying these two books. I gave Truly Devious 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I gave The Vanishing Stair 4 out of 5 stars. So I have very high hopes for the next book. I can't remember what it's called. I would definitely recommend these books on audio. I think they are much easier to consume that way, and I would love to hear what you think because BookTube is going absolutely mad for these books. People are loving them so much. Right, so I just ran out of recording time, and I thought I hit record and I filmed the rest of this wrap-up, and I didn't hit record, so I'm like 90% sure the rest of these books I haven't talked about and that I'm not missing anything, but why? The next book that I have is one that I'm really happy I read and enjoyed. I really like this author just as a human. She's really, really awesome. I've been lucky enough to meet her a couple of times, and I picked up this book in the summer, I think. And it was one I wanted to save for the colder months, which will become obvious why in a minute. And I'm really, really happy I read this book. I think it's really, really fun. If you like YA crime, you should definitely pick this up. This is The Sharp Edge of a Snowflake by Siv Sigmastadir. This book follows two characters. So we have Hannah, whose mother has just passed away, and she has to move from the UK to Iceland to live with her father, who she has a very strained relationship with, and he gives her a kind of a junior position at the newspaper that he runs. And on their way home from the airport, when he has picked her up, there is a body that has been discovered, and she immediately becomes intrigued by what happened to this person. So then we also have Imogen, and Imogen is a social media influencer. She is a huge Instagram star, and she has kind of outwardly a perfect life, but she has dealt with something horrible in the past, and we don't know what that is. So we have these two characters whose storylines kind of converge because Imogen has to come over from the UK to Iceland for a social media conference, and their storylines get all twisted up. And this book has a lot of really great twists and turns. I really enjoyed this. I particularly enjoyed the resolution of this book, which I think is always really important for a crime book. I really enjoyed the characters as well. I knew I would like Hannah, but I was really surprised by how much I loved Imogen's character. I thought she was so incredibly well done. So if you're interested in YA crime, especially if you have read something like Truly Devious and you're interested in reading more and you desperately want to consume more YA crime, I would definitely recommend picking this up. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and just a really quick warning, there is quite graphic attempted sexual assault in this book, and there's obviously murder in this book as well, and I think there is possibly suicide or attempted suicide or talk of suicide. I might be completely wrong about that, but something's telling me there is. So just a quick content warning if that's not something that you like. The last of the YA crime books that I binged this month is one that is really popular, and I didn't know anything about this really going in, except that it is meant to be kind of like The Breakfast Club but with murder, which is awesome. So I have heard very mixed things about this book. I think because it is a really popular book, people have a lot of thoughts about it, but I really enjoyed this. This is One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. This is, I think, being turned into a TV show right now, which is kind of exciting. I'd be really interested to see how they translate this to screen. And it was really fun. We have 4 characters. We have our kind of geeky girl who's a mathlete. She's on track to go to the Ivy League. We have our kind of jock character who is a kind of star baseball player who's being scouted for the MLB. We have our like really popular girl whose life sort of revolves around her boyfriend. And we have our kind of drug dealing bad boy type character. And all four of these characters are sent to detention. And there's a fifth person who is sent to detention as well. His name is Simon, and he is not the most beloved person at this school because he runs a like a gossip site specifically for this school. So he will write, he doesn't use people's names, but he uses people's initials, and he will write about the kind of scandalous secrets that people have, whether it's, you know, cheating on partners, cheating on tests, you know, someone trying to make a move on someone else's boyfriend, whatever. He writes about all these things and they're all true. Somehow he finds out this horrible stuff about people. So he's not exactly loved, and no one can really sort of say anything about it because they worry that they will end up on the site next. So naturally, someone does not survive this detention, and it is indeed Simon. Simon drinks from a cup and he goes into anaphylactic shock. He's allergic to peanuts, and somehow peanuts or peanut oil was in this cup. So our four characters, the Bayview Four, named after the high school, are suspected of murder, and we get all four of their points of view, and they're trying to figure out what happened. Who is lying? Who is telling the truth? Who is not saying what they really know? So I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really, really fun. It has 4 different narrators for the audiobook, so you really get the differentiation between the characters. And I really enjoyed the characters as well, which is obviously incredibly important if you have something like this that's so character focused. I was really surprised by who my favorite character was, and I won't say who that person is because I think that'll spoil the fun, but their character growth was really amazing to watch throughout the story. I really enjoyed this. I thought that the resolution was really fun. Again, something that's really important in a crime book, and I thought that this was just great. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to be reading the next book, which I don't think is a sequel because that doesn't make much sense. I think it's Two Can Keep a Secret, and I think it's a completely different sort of setup, but a similar murder that happens at a high school, so I'm very much looking forward to that. And really quickly before my battery dies, I have 2 more books. So I read 2 books by Agatha Christie this month, The ABC Murders and Murder in Mesopotamia. These were surprisingly both 3-star reads for me. I have loved the 3 other books that I read by her, but these ones were just kind of in the middle. The ABC Murders is a really fun concept with an absolutely batshit crazy solution, which was a bit mad. Basically, someone is sending letters to Poirot and telling him that someone is going to be murdered in this town on this date, and they have to try to track this person down before they can send the next letter, before they can kill the next person. And then we have Murder in Mesopotamia, which is a really interesting one because no one is murdered for the first 100 pages or so. Very unusual for Agatha Christie, and Poirot doesn't show up for quite a long time in this book, but she does a great job of building the tensions. I loved the resolution, but this book is mega racist. Like, it's really, really uncomfortable. There's some things like Day of the Triffids where it's got some sexism in it, but I'm kind of like more forgiving because it's just a product of its time. It sucks, it's kind of uncomfortable to read, but you get through it. Murder in Mesopotamia has some messed up stuff in it. It's also super misogynistic as well. Our main character who kind of is telling the story, because these books are told kind of after the fact, someone's writing down their experience with the case. Our character who is doing that is a nurse, and her like ideas about women are awful. And she's also super racist. So if you're looking to read some Agatha Christie but you don't want to read any racist stuff, this is not the one for that. I don't think that this would be a great place to start with her either. It's a very famous story, and it had a apparently really terrible BBC adaptation done. I don't think either of these are anywhere near her strongest stuff that I've read so far. If you've seen my November TBR, I have a ton of her books on that TBR. I really enjoy her stuff. I really enjoy her puzzles and her mysteries. These 2 were, I wouldn't say they were misses, because I did enjoy them, but they were not my faves. That is it for this video. I'm really happy with my reading progress in the month of October. I had such a better month, and I think that a lot of it had to do with improved mental health and all that good stuff. So I'm really, really pleased with my reading progress. I'm really pleased with the number of books that I read and the quality of the books that I read as well. I think that reading outside of my regular genre really helped. In the comments below, I would love to hear if you've read any of these books, if they're in your TBR, or what you read in the month of October. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.